Dreams of roaming the open road through tall trees and towering mountains have tugged on my heart for decades. I crave this wandering and wondering so much that I've been fantasizing about living out of a converted van so I can dedicate large amounts of time to witnessing nature's beauty. While I haven't been able to fully jump into van life, when May turned to June in 2021, my husband John and I finally got to try it out. We rented a converted Ram ProMaster van with wood countertops, a gas stove, and everything we needed to survive on the road. My heart bounced with glee as we filled the van with our belongings, carefully arranging each item so as to maximize the storage capacity of this tiny space. After loading it up with cooking and hiking gear, we set out towards the Sierra Nevadas. Our first stop was a night at my friend Dolly's house, high on a mountain looking west to the sunset. We rolled up in the late afternoon to find two rambunctious corgis barking an alert to our arrival. While Dolly and I had connected online, we had never met in person. Almost exactly 1 year earlier, she had been a guest on my podcast. And before that, we had been in touch for a long while, always hoping we could get together one day. Finally hugging each other and hanging out in real life was beyond a treat, as was meeting her husband Chris and her kids. It felt like we had been friends forever, already hanging out all the time. That night in Dolly's driveway, every cell in my body beamed with joy as we cooked dinner in the van and got settled for our first night of van life. I felt so cozy and at home in this tiny space that held everything we needed. The next morning, we caravanned with Dolly and Chris towards Lake Tahoe for a short walk through huge pine trees covered in neon green lichens. Then we hopped back in the van to explore a lake high up in the mountains. I tried not to hold my breath as we drove up winding mountain roads with no guardrails and nearly vertical drops off the side. The van handled everything, no sweat, and we were even able to deftly negotiate our way through tight squeezes where trees had fallen in the road. We strolled at an easy pace around a lake of crystal clear waters lined by towering rocky peaks, my heart singing at how fortunate we were to be here in this wild beauty. Even though late May feels like summer down where we live, high up in the mountains it felt closer to spring. That night, Dolly and Chris went home, while John and I drove about 10 minutes down the mountain and parked on the side of a dirt road in a national forest for the night. Just beyond the trees next to the van, clear water flowed over a rocky stream bed in a pristine alpine creek, and the setting sun lit us up in a golden glow. I was in heaven. If I could have moved in and stayed here, I would have. Since no one was around, I stripped down and danced in the cold waters while the sun warmed my skin, feeling a sense of deep freedom in my soul. I was totally at home 7,000 feet above sea level in the quiet wilderness, where I bookmarked this moment as one to remember. After getting dressed and exploring a little ways up the mountain from the van, we headed back to cook dinner. John was at home in his mobile kitchen, whipping up a meal better than we could get at any restaurant. We had perfectly cooked steak in the fading light as the stars came out to shine. I fell asleep feeling so alive, knowing we were surrounded by nothing but nature for miles and miles. We woke up early the next morning and got ready for an epic hike. Chris and Dolly came back to the mountain, along with one of their kids, and while the day was still young, we began the 8-mile trek to the top of the mountain and back. I have never hiked so high up, and I've rarely hiked an incline for great distances, so I was nervous about whether I could handle the trip. Making our way through changing ecosystems, we were in a rocky bald 1 minute, and then an evergreen forest the next. Wearing red lipstick and a hat, I cruised up the mountain with ease, surprising myself at how much incline I could handle. My short legs couldn't compare to Chris's long strides, however, so I was always hustling a little to keep up. Eventually, our path led us to mostly bald rock faces, where nothing but a few carefully placed rocks indicated the trail. Chris and Dolly were very familiar with where to go, as they had both been coming here since they were kids. This kind of hiking was new to me though, as most of my mountaintop experiences have been with mountains that have soil and plants all the way to the top. High above us, we could see the peaks where snow was still standing. Crystal clear snowmelt rushed down the mountain, sometimes as a creek, sometimes as a sheet of water. Using our Grayl water bottles, which can filter water down to the level of removing viruses, we drank copious amounts of this wild water. Dolly went all out and drank from the creeks without filtration, sipping the cold water from her bare hand. John and I wanted to stop and explore every little nook and cranny of the mountain, but Dolly and Chris kept us paced to make it to the top where the real gem of the hike was waiting for us. Every so often, however, they'd point out mushrooms on the side of the trail, stating whether they were good for eating or best left be. It was hard to believe after passing waterfalls, epic views, and a lovely bog blooming with spring flowers that there could be something even more mind-blowing at the top. After hiking for 3 hours, we made it to a different world where, despite being only 3 weeks from the summer solstice, snow was still on the ground. Walking along a stretch of rocks with a few twisted trees trying their best to grow, before us lay an alpine lake with clear, near-freezing water, fed by a gushing waterfall of snowmelt. I knew lakes existed on the top of mountains, but this was new. This was a different dimension of pristine beauty, and I never wanted to leave. We ate our lunch, stripped and dipped. The water was so cold that we could only get in for a few seconds of pure invigoration. Being able to experience a place this clear and clean was a blessing not to take for granted. Just a week or so before we came, there was much more snow on the ground, and in a few weeks, it'd all be gone. We'd arrived in the perfect time to enjoy warm weather and snow all at the same time before the summer sun melted it away. John is deeply nourished by waterfalls, so he trekked out alone to see how close he could get to the waterfall in the distance. We watched him walk around the lake and then disappear over a hump. He managed to get very close to the roaring water as he balanced on rocks along the steep slope. Where he was, I would not go, and I'm so glad he made it back safe. When it came time to leave, I tried to stall, but Dolly and Chris had to get home. Heading down the mountain, I kept falling behind because I wanted to take pictures and shoot videos of every little beautiful sight. At one point, I worried that I'd lose sight of the pack and lose the trail, but I kept my wits about me and found my way just fine. Back at the base, we said our goodbyes to Dolly and Chris, and then we went hunting for our next spot to spend the night. Creeping down the mountain in the van, I saw what looked like a big stick in the road, but it was moving. It was a rattlesnake. We stopped and waited for it to cross the road with its unhurried slithering, grateful that we didn't cross paths with it while on foot. Back in the valley below, we found a great place to park on a hill above a river. John whipped up the most delicious meal, and we played a convoluted board game fashioned after the Oregon Trail computer game of our childhoods. After an epic day of hiking, we were wiped out and ready to rest, so rest we did. The next day was our last with the van. Upon waking, we dipped in the river, ate breakfast, and got on the road. We ended up finding the perfect spot to have a picnic and lounge a little bit on the side of a huge river flowing through a valley towards the edge of the mountain range. After enjoying our final moments in the Sierras, we headed home to unpack and drop off the van. I hated having to let the van go because I was ready to move in and roam full time. The next day, we were so excited about vans that we went to the Ford dealership and test drove the only cargo van that they had on the lot. While it wasn't exactly what we were looking for, it was so helpful just to try it out and get a feel for driving a Ford van versus the Ram that we rented. The dealer we talked to also happened to be super into watching van life videos on YouTube, and he was able to help us spec out what features would be best for creating our own conversion van. The only problem was new vans like that cost a boatload of money, and they wouldn't even be in our hands for maybe 9 months if we bought one. So we didn't buy one, but the dream lives on.